Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the AI Healthcare Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Reed, and today we are joined with my friend Luká Yancopoulos, who is the CEO of Grapevine Technologies. Thank you so much again for your time today, Luka.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Dylan.
Yeah, we're glad for you to be here. And how did you get into the AI healthcare field?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I've got a stake in the healthcare field in a way that I mean, in part a way that I think everyone does. I mean, at some point in our lives, we all become patients, and I think healthcare is something that um, really comes to the top of the priority list as someone who, when everyone touches a certain sector at some point in their lives, it's important, for everyone. Also, my parents are both in the healthcare space. My mom's a nurse practitioner. My dad's a medical doctor and scientific researcher. And I was studying biomedical engineering at UPenn when COVID happened, and suddenly we were quarantining in our dorm rooms and didn't really know um, what our fate would be. But I knew that people were applauding frontline workers, and there seemed to be a lot of risk for frontline workers. And then all the news headlines were stories about supply chain failure and price gouging. At our dinner table conversations that were over Zoom, my parents were talking about the horror stories of those supply chain failures, of surgeons wearing garbage bags right over their clothes while performing an operation because they couldn't get surgical gowns and so on. And it was something that honestly terrified me. And I got involved because I wanted to contribute to a solution that my parents were facing, and my parents were at risk. And I wanted to be a part of helping de-risk the lives that they were facing. So that's really my call to action. But again, I really do think there's a moral humanitarian obligation to make healthcare more affordable and accessible. Because again, one day we all become patients, and one day that becomes a priority for each and every one of us.
And what you just said goes into my next question nicely. What is the story behind Grapevine Technologies?
Yeah, I guess Grapevine's a software that creates time for doctors while cutting the costs of patient care. It's not just a solution for healthcare businesses or medical practices. It's a solution for everyone because, like I said, everyone becomes patients at one point in their life. And our mission is to empower doctors and nurses to provide a higher quality of patient care, to see more patients, and to do more for each patient that they see.
Mhm.
And our team has proven capable. Like I said, we started in a response to the pandemic, a response to supply chain failures, trying to get supplies into the hands of those who needed it and those who were protecting, the lives of everyone else out there. And we reimagined the structure of supply chains to fit the unique needs of the healthcare system. We built this network-like structure, and to date, we've delivered savings by the millions, one medical practice at a time. And I could talk more about the user experience or sort of our origins and how we went from dorm room solving problems. But is there, yeah,
Yeah. No, I think the origins of Grapevine and then the user experience go hand in hand nicely.
yeah. So where we started, um, like I said, was trying to get supplies in the hands of those frontline workers who were having trouble accessing them. And we started compiling import data, cross-referencing it with FDA medical device license, data, all of which was public, to identify sort of government verified streams of supplies that were coming into the country when everyone was talking about all the supplies that weren't coming into the country. So we look at the import records, we see what overlaps with FDA medical device licenses, and bam, there we have a hit. There we have a source of supplies that we can connect to a frontline worker. And we weren't running a business at this point. We're sitting in our dorm room and handing off contact points, right, sources to my mom, her friends, other nurses and frontline workers that we knew. And they started ordering the supplies that they needed from these alternative and newfound sources that we were creating and identifying for them. It was a couple months later that some of the nation's biggest businesses, some of the oldest companies in this country and biggest companies in this country, actually reached out to us after hearing that we were servicing their customers, which is a funny way of putting it, because again, that's not, we didn't think of them as customers, and we didn't even think of what we were doing as a service, really. So these big distributors, the McKessons of the world, they reached out to us wanting to order supplies from us, thinking of us as a source of supplies. We were really just a source of data, but we hopped online, set up a bank account, and started receiving purchase orders, from these major distributors, and we were drop shipping supplies from these importers directly to some of the biggest medical suppliers in this country. And that was the first sort of big red flag for us, right? Why are some of the biggest businesses that are doing $200 billion in revenue a year sending orders for millions of masks and, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars of supplies to a couple of kids in their college dorm room? Something here is broken, and something here needs to change. So those ideas and the foundation that we had sort of built on at that point, I mean, we ended up doing $20 million of sales revenue, basically drop shipping supplies from these different identified sources. But that was all with a sort of like you could call it like an MVP, you could call it an initial product, whatever you want to call it. But through that experience, we ended up seeing a lot of the bigger problems from a bird's eye view, going back to the drawing board and building a software as a service product for medical practices to connect directly with the network of suppliers that they already use, while also tapping into the network of suppliers sources that we're identifying for them in real time. And initially, this was a project to sort of fill back orders, to find supplies where there were no supplies. But obviously, times change, systems like renormalize, and people were able to sort of shop their supplies, from a single source once again. But the value of this network model in a supply chain started to prove to have serious savings implications. I'm talking like 50, 60% by optimizing all of the places you can shop now on one screen, bringing all that together. And at the point of purchase, when you hit add to cart, right, looking at the 10 different sources from which you could buy the same exact product, seeing what the best price is, seeing where there's stock availability, and redirecting that purchaser to the right place, that ends up resulting in 60% savings, which is millions of dollars for some of the larger healthcare institutes and medical practices in the U.S. As far as, I mean, I'm happy to dive into the user experience, but does that make sense as far as our origins?
Yeah. So it's kind of like this is technically not a verb, but you're trying to be like kind of the Amazon in a way.
Yeah, in a way, we're Amazon. I would say that Amazon introduces you to news sources, which is definitely a huge part of what we do. In a way, we're also like Expedia, right? Or like Kayak, if you ever use that for booking your flights or sort of vacation. We're not always just introducing you to news sources the way that Amazon does. But from a user experience, when you sign up to Grapevine, there are no products. That's very different than Amazon, right? And you start by linking your suppliers, right? The suppliers you already work with, that you've negotiated contracts with to get bulk volume discounts and specific pricing and whatnot. You've linked GPOs to benefit from sort of economies of scale. So you link in your suppliers, and all of your products from your contracted suppliers, they flow in. Right. And now you can shop this sort of shopping center. It looks and feels like Amazon, but it's only the products and the suppliers that you already trust, the sales reps that you already work with, the contracts that you already have in place. And if you choose to sort of go further, right, and unlock new suppliers, you can do that. You can tap into a marketplace in Grapevine, an Amazon style place, shop new suppliers. But a lot of times in the healthcare space, people want to optimize the sources they already know before they jump into new sources, suppliers who they don't yet trust or haven't worked with.
And specifically on the kind of the supplier side of healthcare, is it still a lot of like, well, I've known Joe for 30 years and I don't want to change my supplier? Like, did you kind of run into those situations when you were starting up Grapevine?
Absolutely. And we actually, when we initially launched Grapevine now 18 months ago, we wanted it to be more of an Amazon-like experience. We thought that we could just connect you to new suppliers to get the same products and people would be satisfied. But there's a lot of specificity in product offerings, right? One hospital might use a specific cardiac implant, right, or a pacemaker, right, for surgeries, whereas another hospital might use another device, right? So aggregating all of those different suppliers in one place proved to be a challenge. And exactly what you said, people had strong relationships and had invested a lot of resources in negotiations and contract management and optimizing pricing from specific sources. They didn't want to give that up, right? Even if it meant some savings. So that's where we had to make a pivot, I'd say a year ago now, to start bringing in the suppliers that they already work with, honoring the work and invested resources that they had put in before touching Grapevine, merging an Amazon-like experience, a marketplace, with the respect for their existing relationships and hard work. But absolutely, people in this space are afraid of change when it's not their core competency, right? I mean, they're handling enough change when it comes to clinical trials and experimental research of new treatment plans, right? That's these sort of doctors, physicians, scientists, that's their focus. That's where they're willing to take risks and make change. When it comes to supply chain, that's not the core focus of a medical practice, of a hospital, right? So they like to keep the things that ain't broke in place. They don't want to fix the things that ain't broken. And that was a challenge that we ran into. So we absolutely pivoted and started bringing those things into the Grapevine experience and making those really the priority for any new users on Grapevine.
Awesome. And I wanted to touch a little bit more upon that logistical theme that you keep bringing up. So Grapevine aims to save up to 50% on medical supply costs, reduce order times by 90%. My question is, how was the supply chain constructed for healthcare organizations pre-Grapevine, and what was the problem specifically that Grapevine noticed, or was it multiple problems that you noticed in the supply chain?
Sure. I'd say the first problem that we noticed was a cost-related problem, a cost of medical supplies, right? We were working directly with these importers, the first source of supplies to touch the products in the United States. And we were able to purchase these supplies, let's say just like a 3-ply mask for a couple of cents, right? And then I would talk to my mom, who's purchasing that exact product from the major distributor who we had resold to, and whatever. And we're seeing that product being marked up 10 times. And it's not a matter of price gouging or greed necessarily. I mean, part of it's like logistical inefficiencies, right? If I got to ship it to my warehouse and then I ship it to someone else's warehouse and they ship it to someone else's warehouse, right? Like the embodied costs of these goods goes up with each sort of layer of a supply chain. So a middleman brings a markup. And part of what we wanted to do was cut away the middlemen and cut away the markups where there was an opportunity to do so to drive down costs significantly. Awesome. On the other hand, we also have sorry, go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay. Some of the other problems that we also saw, and this is true, especially true for smaller medical practices who don't have a whole procurement department, but also true in hospitals, right? There's a huge amount of reliance on sort of single source shopping. And what I mean by that is like they will go to a single brick and mortar supplier's website. Let's call it McKesson, right? McKesson stores all the products that they sell in their warehouses. They've got dozens, if not hundreds of warehouses across the United States. And they store all these supplies in their warehouse. And because of convenience, right, procurement personnel, office managers, shoppers, as we call them, will go to a single website to shop most of the stuff. They're not going to open 4 different websites to compare pricing to save a couple bucks here and there. But oftentimes, they're missing out on little opportunities to save and big opportunities to save. So convenience of the shopping experience brings people to a single source of spend. And the problem with that is it creates a monopoly for each medical practice on their spend. They're not having a free market for suppliers to compete, right, for their spend. It's not effectively lowering prices, to cater to the customer's demand and needs. People are often spending 90%, even big hospitals are spending, up to 90% of their med supply spend with a single major distributor. And that creates huge problems. So enter Grapevine, right? And we will take that, we think of it as like a pie chart, right? But it's all of your spend going to sort of one supplier. We divvy up that pie into many different slices and direct your orders to the smartest source every time you shop and add to cart. Basically diversifying your spend amongst a lot of suppliers. And it not only cuts costs by allowing people to compete and creating more of a competitive marketplace for your suppliers to work with you, but it also saves you a lot of time, in doing that. and helps you solve back orders. When one supplier, your usual single source supplier, runs out of stock in his warehouse, you've got 4 or 5 other suppliers that you can immediately plug in, not by going to a different website, but by trying to add to cart that old product, that old supplier, and seeing where Grapevine will take you. And you pair that with, the competitive marketplace, the redirecting spend, where Grapevine's acting as a traffic cop to serve your interest. We pair that with a marketplace where we cut out the middleman and his markup every time you shop. So if there's an opportunity to go direct to the manufacturer, direct to the importer, the person that your supplier is buying from, we do that, effectively cutting out a markup, cutting out efficiencies, cutting out incidences of sort of shortage and whatnot. So those are, I'd say, 2 of the biggest changes: is diversifying your spend across a broader basket of suppliers, which effectively lowers your spend, oftentimes by as much as 50%. That is a normal number for us, and also helps you sort of reduce the incidences of back orders and solve shortages before they happen.
And they can use that money to either increase staff or increase in current infrastructure.
Yeah, and oftentimes they will pass their savings forward to their patients, right? If my expenses go down as a business, I got different things I can do, Dylan. You got a growth sort of mindset, and you're a young entrepreneur. And I think when you get more capital, your mind goes to sort of like growth. How do we build more? But sometimes these doctors don't want to build more. These medical practices are satisfied with what they've got, and their goal becomes, delivering exactly what they do now at a lower price for their patients, so their patients can, one, be more satisfied, and 2, reduce the burden of the services they're getting from their doctors. So passing forward the savings is something that medical practices do just as often as reinvesting it in sort of different growth strategies.
Awesome. And you touched upon this a little bit in your answers, but how has the shift been for key stakeholders, for those who have used, I really like on your website, you talk about 90s supply chain materials in the past to today. Like, how has that transition been?
Sorry, do you mind asking that again, Dylan?
Yes. How has the shift been for stakeholders, for those who might have been used to kind of a 90s style way of doing supply chain to now?
Yeah, sure. One, I guess we try to make it as seamless as possible. A lot of people say, meet the customer where they're at. We reframe that as this concept of 11:59 p.m., right? The future can be intimidating for people, especially if the future you're talking about isn't a future that they sort of focus on. Supply chain isn't the core competency of a medical practice. So the future can be scary. Understand, to bring someone who's scared of the future into your future, the way you see it, you got to understand the things about the customer's current life, the medical practice's current life, that annoy them, that frustrate them, but also the things that they like about what they do. You got to, preserve the things they love and remove the things that bother them, right? That moment that you can get a customer to, when you really have that understanding, you're not stepping on the toes, taking away things that they appreciate or value in what they do in their daily lives, but you're only removing the parts that they hate. That moment is 11:59. And in that moment, the future, tomorrow, is just another silly minute away, right? And that's why we call it 11:59. But it's the same concept of meeting the customer where they're at. Now, when we're talking about sort of making the change to Grapevine and preserving the sort of status quo, I think we try to blend the parts of their work life that they enjoy with the parts of their shopping personal life they enjoy, right? So a lot of systems. So let's talk about a smaller medical practice. A smaller medical practice is going to shop on a single e-commerce site, right? An e-commerce site being a single major distributor. We could call them McKesson's website. And they're going to basically get all their products, 90% of their spend from a single source. We've already established the issues and problems related to that. But the single screen is important, right? Giving them an intuitive shopping experience on a single screen. So when the customer is now shopping all their suppliers on Grapevine, right, we put it all into one screen. We make it feel like you're shopping a single supplier. It's just the orders get sent out to 10 different websites, 10 different suppliers with the click of a button when you create order. Now, a lot of the systems that have been in place since, the 90s and early 2000s these e-procurement systems, or ERPs, which are enterprise resource planning systems, they don't feel like shopping. Like if someone from our generation looked at what you do to create an order, like a multi-vendor, so ERPs and e-procurement systems are built to help with multi-vendor sort of management and multi-vendor shopping. But like I said, they're not shopping experiences. They're tables. They're like QuickBooks. They look more like a accounting sort of software than they do like an Amazon. Right. So we're trying to take the multi-vendor sort of management experience and simplicity of use and blend it with the modern e-commerce shopping experience that everyone practices in their own lives, and even soup it up and make it even better than what people have in their own lives. And our goal is not just to, make the best shopping experience while managing different vendors of your choosing, but it's also to reduce your time spent shopping, right? Let you focus on your core competency, which is patient care and patient outcomes. I dream of a world where doctors, medical practice staff, and employees never shop again. They don't go to any website. And that's a bit more of an evolution, right? That would be a bigger change that I don't know people are comfortable with yet today. But that's part of where we're using AI, is studying the trends and the purchasing behavior for, let's call it like an oncology institute that's got 100 locations, seeing the cadence by which they order each of their products and automating the reordering and the shopping for that medical practice or that network of medical practices. So they never need to go onto a screen, click add to cart ever again, save them the time and the burden of that altogether. That's something we're working towards, in the next year or two. But for now, it's co-location and a simplified shopping experience.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point. Because nowadays I would even go as far as arguing that apps on your iPhone or your Android device are slowly but surely overtaking websites now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you can just go on your, instead of typing in, I'll just use Amazon as an example, Amazon.com. I can just download an app on my phone, hit Amazon, hit order, and then that the shopping time just totally gets cut down in half.
And even a lot of the sort of like staple biggest suppliers in the space that really monopolize a lot of medical practice spend, they don't even have like a mobile. I mean, none of them that I know of have a mobile app for ordering from your feet. And if you think about like when a doctor or a nurse realizes they're out of stock, it's like they're in the patient room. They're about to inject the patient with a needle. They open the cabinet and they see nothing's in there, right? So what do they do to remember to order supplies? They scribble it down on a note. They do their best to serve the patient in the way that they can. And then at the end of the day, they sit down at their desktop computer and place an order. It makes no damn sense. I mean, allowing people to shop from their feet is a huge step forward of giving people convenience of a shopping experience while they're practicing medicine, working around the lifestyle and the workload of a physician or a healthcare provider in their daily routine, as opposed to adding on this sort of burden of shopping thereafter. So going mobile is a huge part of simplifying sort of shopping for these people, and taking it a step further. I mean, opening the supply cabinet and having it always filled, knowing it's the best price and your spend is cut in half, is a step even further than mobile ordering. There is no screen, there is no button, and that's where we're going with this thing.
Wow. And and that also goes into my next question nicely too as well. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, what was startling to you about the conventional healthcare supply chain, either from, both from a personal perspective as well as a business perspective when running Grapevine?
I would say the opportunity we were given as a handful of college kids in our dorm, right, to work with, like I said, one of the biggest companies in the United States, a company that does hundreds of billions of dollars of sales revenue each year, right? An opportunity from that company to work with a couple of college kids that had been consolidating and analyzing data for a few weeks, right? That was startling, right? Why is this company working with us? Why do they want to work with us? Shouldn't they be more equipped to handle these sort of problems on their own? Shouldn't they be the ones solving these problems? But no, I mean, things grow stagnant, and a lot of the people that built these companies into what they are no longer work there. They're floating giant sort of bureaucracies. We call them distribution dinosaurs over here. That was one thing. I mean, the other thing that really blew my mind was seeing the end user pricing on these products compared to the prices that we could find the same exact product, same brand, like same, I'm talking Kleenex to Kleenex, not like, Kleenex to Charmin or whatever, right? The same exact brand, same exact product on the ground in the United States for the same delivery times. We're able to find these products at 1/10 the price. And a lot of industries aren't like that. Like even if you go on Amazon, you're not going to see things that are 90% off for the same exact product line. Maybe they're changing a little bit, but they're pretty consistent. It's pretty competitive. And I think that comes from the little monopolies that distributors hold on their medical practices and their spend. So I'd say that the shocking costs of 10x markups on the prices that we were able to source these same products for, compared with the opportunity that's given to a couple of college kids who are working on this week, that was where we noticed something is very wrong and something needs to change. Obviously, we had to dive deeper to figure out how to do that and what changes we wanted to make.
And where would you personally want Grapevine to go in the next year or two?
In the next year or two, I would like to, right now in the United States, it's about $500 billion of spend on medical supplies and pharmaceuticals. I would like Grapevine to cut that in half. So right now we're cutting spend by a medical practice by 50%, one practice at a time. If we can deliver what we're doing at scale, right, to all medical practices, all healthcare businesses, we can cut that medical supply in half. And I think that's a realistic goal, and we're aiming to do it in the next 2 years, right? Save this country $200 billion on med supply and pharmaceutical spend. Now, beyond that, I think there's huge applications beyond sort of supply chain. I mean, at least in the context that we're talking, and solving problems for medical practices. Our future in the more like the 5-year timeline is trying to directly serve patients and patient outcomes, not just saving money, for the medical practice and letting them reinvest in the way that you mentioned earlier, but forcing lower costs for patients. I think that there's a world in the next 10 years where we can cut the medical bills that every patient in this country sees and feels in half by 50% too. And it's going to take more innovation than what we've talked about in this conversation, but we've got big ideas and the impact is going to grow from there.
Yeah. And awesome. And then my last question is, what do you think that elected officials need to understand in constructing future healthcare policy that makes the supply chain more innovative for future healthcare organizations?
I think that it's really important they talk a lot in healthcare about like cost control these days and patient costs, right? And when we talk about sort of supply chain innovation, I think there's a playground for innovation in optimizing sort of the flow of goods to lower costs for everyone, by engineering smarter supply chain structures, dynamics, et cetera. I think that the legislation being talked about is great to push supply chain innovation, to push further efficiency, right, to lower costs in that sense. And that's what we're doing here at Grapevine. I think it's dangerous in the world of innovation in diagnostics and innovation in treatments. I think that if you sort of force costs lower, right, reducing the profitability of, if you force costs lower, there's 2 ways to get those costs lower. You can optimize the supply chain, right, between the source of manufacturing and the end user's consumption of the product, or you can force down prices from the manufacturers, force down profit margins from the people that are making diagnostics tools and devices at home, whatever, or treatment plans that you can get, new drugs, the real life-saving stuff. So I think that's where I get nervous. I don't want to stifle innovation in the treatment world. I don't think that the treatments we have today and the diagnostic tools that we have today are sufficient, for humanity's needs. Like, I think that we can solve cancer if we put the right incentives in place over the next couple hundred years, right? I think that we can diagnose diseases that a newborn baby doesn't have, but might develop 30 years down the line, right? But if we put sort of financial controls in place that, stifle innovation and stifle investment in the treatment development and diagnostic development, I think that's a dangerous game, because no matter how efficient, we make supply chains, no matter how much we innovate in the world of supply chains, all we can do is lower the cost of the treatments and diagnostics that exist today. And I want there to be better treatments and better diagnostic tools. So I would encourage legislators to figure out a way to make things more efficient without stifling innovation for diagnostic tools and treatment plans, and not cut into the profits of those companies, but cut into the profits of my company, of Grapevine. Force us to be more efficient, not the people creating life-changing medicine.
Yeah. So it's, you're kind of saying something that I also share the same perspective you do as well. It's like, how do you improve patient outcomes, but also at the same time decrease federal spending when it comes to healthcare? Because we spend more on healthcare than other countries in the world, and we have worse outcomes.
Yeah,
and it just doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make any sense.
But yeah, no. And Luka, where can people find more about you as well as Grapevine?
Yeah, so our platform is completely free to use. Everything we've been talking about today for medical practices and healthcare businesses. And you can sign up on go-grapevine.com. It's like go-grapevine.com. And my email is just Luka, Luka, at that same website, go-grapevine.com. I'd say your best bet for getting a timely response, my inbox is always flooded. Your best bet for getting a timely response is going to be through our website and a sign up.
Awesome. And be sure to subscribe to the AI Healthcare Podcast on YouTube, as well as listen to the audio version of this interview on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Luka, thank you so much again for your time today.
Thank you, Dylan.
This is Dylan Reed signing